On September 23, 2025, President Donald Trump made a notable return to the world stage. He gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly. It was a very strong and controversial speech, one of the most talked about in the UN's history. During his long speech, President Trump openly spoke against the global organization itself. He also criticized European leaders for their plans on immigration and climate. He clearly showed his America First way of thinking to the world. The speech was much longer than the usual 15 minutes. It was a direct message against global cooperation. Unlike his speech in 2018, which made some world leaders laugh, this time the reaction was different. President Trump's tough words were met with a very quiet hall. There was an uncomfortable silence and a clear feeling of tension. People said this kind of diplomatic tension is rare in the General Assembly Hall. The beginning of President Trump's speech had a problem. The equipment did not work well. "I don't mind making this speech without a teleprompter, because the teleprompter is not working," President Trump announced. This caused some nervous laughter. He then told a story about an escalator. It stopped when he and First Lady Melania Trump were going up to the General Assembly Hall. She almost fell. He used these small technical problems to highlight what he saw as bigger issues with the United Nations. "These are the two things I got from the United Nations: a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter," President Trump stated. He used these failures to suggest deeper problems. His words created a strong feeling in the room. World leaders listened carefully. There was a quiet tension in the General Assembly Hall. People in the audience seemed worried and unsure about what would come next. 2. A warning to Europe. President Donald Trump's speech included some very strong words for European leaders. He spoke directly about their immigration and energy policies. Many people in the audience found his words surprising and direct, creating a tense atmosphere. President Trump warned European leaders, saying, "Your countries are going to hell." He explained that many Western nations faced big problems. He described these problems as a double-tailed monster. This monster, he said, had two parts: uncontrolled migration and what he called bad green energy plans. He believed these two things were harming their nations greatly. He was very clear about his thoughts on Europe's immigration rules. Donald Trump said it was time to end the failed experiment of open borders. He argued that he understood these issues well. He told European leaders that their countries were struggling because of these policies. He also suggested that leaders were destroying their countries by focusing too much on certain ideas of political correctness. He wanted them to change their approach to people entering their nations. President Trump also strongly attacked Europe's plans for clean energy. He called renewable energy a green scam. He said that green energy was not a good idea for their economies. He warned that if countries continued with this green scam, their nations would fail. He explained his reasons for this warning. Donald Trump argued that green energy policies were making electricity very expensive for people in Europe. He said these high costs were a serious problem. He even claimed that thousands of people were dying each year because they could not afford to heat or cool their homes properly. This, he argued, was a direct result of Europe's focus on green energy. These policies, he stated, were destroying their economies. His message was a clear warning to Europe. He wanted them to change their minds about who could enter their borders and how they produced their power. He felt these choices were hurting their money systems and their societies. The leaders listening had to think about these very direct words from the President of the United States. He wanted Europe to take a new path to avoid a bad future for their countries. 3. The UN is failing. The President then focused his speech on the United Nations organization itself. He raised a direct question to the world leaders. What is the purpose of the United Nations? He shared his view that the UN holds tremendous potential. However, he quickly added that the organization was not living up to this promise. He felt it was not even coming close to reaching its full capability. This showed his belief that the UN was failing in its core mission to help solve global issues and maintain peace. He continued by stating that the UN had failed to assist him in important matters. The President claimed that during his time in office, he had worked hard to end 7 wars. He explained that he personally dealt with the leaders of each country involved to reach peace agreements. Yet, he said, the United Nations never offered any support. He stated that he never even received a phone call from the UN to help finalize these deals. This made it clear that he was disappointed with the UN's lack of practical involvement in resolving international conflicts. The President described the UN's efforts as mostly consisting of empty words. He believed that the organization would often write really strongly worded letters to address problems, but he felt these letters were rarely followed by real actions. He stressed that empty words don't solve war. For him, serious global challenges require more than discussions or formal letters. They demand actual steps that lead to lasting solutions and peace. His message was that the UN needed to change its approach. He wanted it to be more effective and deliver real results. He suggested the organization talked too much and acted too little. In his view, the UN was not meeting the needs of the modern world. He challenged the idea that the UN truly brought countries together for peace. Instead, he presented an image of an organization that talks a great deal but achieves little. This reflected his opinion that the UN was failing in its promise. He sought tangible outcomes, not just ongoing conversations. 4. The 7 peace deals. President Donald Trump often spoke about bringing peace. In his speech, he said he ended 7 wars that people believed could not be stopped. He claimed he worked with leaders from these countries to make peace deals. He also noted that the United Nations did not help him with these efforts. He then listed the conflicts he believed he resolved. These included Armenia and Azerbaijan, Cambodia and Thailand, and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. He also named Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, and Kosovo and Serbia. Trump saw himself as a major peacemaker. However, after his speech, many experts and fact-checkers looked closely at these claims. They wanted to understand the real situation. Their findings showed a different picture than what President Trump had shared. These analyses showed that while Trump played a role in some peace talks, many agreements were not strong. Experts called them fragile. This meant the peace deals could easily break. Some agreements were only for a short time. In other cases, fighting or problems started again soon after the deals were made. For some conflicts, there was little proof that a major war was even about to begin. Ken Schultz, a political scientist from Stanford University, studies conflicts. He said that making an agreement is just the first step. He explained that a process needs to follow to make peace last. The durability of these peace agreements remained uncertain. Some of them had already seen new tensions or violence, showing their weakness. So, while President Donald Trump announced he had ended 7 unendable wars, the truth was more complex. The peace was often not strong, and new problems could appear, making lasting peace a real challenge. 5. A different view on climate. President Donald Trump spoke very strongly about climate change. He said it was the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. He claimed that many predictions about climate change have been wrong. He also said that new green energy sources, like wind and solar, are not effective. He warned that if countries continued with these green energy plans, they would face problems. He argued that these policies made electricity very expensive in Europe. He even said this led to thousands of deaths because people could not afford to heat or cool their homes. He stated that European electricity costs were much higher than in China or the United States. However, a German government official mentioned that a large part of Germany's electricity already comes from clean sources, and they plan to use even more by 2030. These strong words about climate science caused an immediate reaction. Climate scientists and environmental groups at the United Nations General Assembly quickly pushed back. They said President Trump's claims went against what the global scientific community largely agrees on. They pointed out that there is a very wide agreement among experts that climate change is real and caused by humans. One climate scientist who works with the major global panel on climate change spoke clearly. She said that millions of people around the world already see the harm climate change brings. She explained that the evidence is not just an idea. It is real, it is deadly, and it needs fast action. An ambassador from Palau, which is a small island nation, also shared her view. She said that not acting on climate change would be unfair to the people most at risk. Small island states and developing nations face big threats. Rising sea levels and extreme weather linked to climate change put their very existence in danger. They depend on global action to protect their homes. President Trump's opinions on climate change were very different from the widespread scientific understanding. His speech made the disagreements about how to deal with climate action very clear at the Assembly. Many present felt a strong tension between his views and the urgent global calls for environmental protection. 6. A new plan for Ukraine. One important change during President Donald Trump's time at the United Nations was his new plan for Ukraine. This came after he met with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. For many months before this, President Trump had talked about Ukraine possibly giving up some land to Russia to find peace. For example, in April, he had said that Crimea would stay with Russia. In August, he even met with Russia's President Vladimir Putin and suggested that land trades could happen. However, after speaking with President Zelensky, President Trump's ideas changed a lot. He then shared a message saying that Ukraine, with support from the European Union, was strong enough to fight. He stated that Ukraine could win all of Ukraine back in its original form. This was a big and surprising change from his earlier thoughts. This sudden change showed a new, tougher approach from President Donald Trump regarding the conflict. It signaled a stronger wish for Ukraine to fully recover its land. President Zelensky later said he believed President Trump now understood that they could not just trade away parts of Ukraine. He felt it was not fair to do that. In his speech at the United Nations, President Trump also spoke about countries that he said were helping Russia. He criticized China and India. He called them primary funders of the ongoing war because they continued to buy Russian oil. He said that by buying this oil, these countries were helping Russia's war economy. He also spoke to European nations. He said they should stop buying energy from Russia completely. President Trump then gave a warning. He said that if countries kept buying Russian oil and supporting Russia's war, the United States would put powerful tariffs on them. Tariffs are special taxes on goods that countries sell. This meant that any country helping Russia financially could face economic problems from the United States. This new plan showed a strong stance on the war in Ukraine and on countries involved in funding Russia. 7. The money problem. The United States had a big problem with money at the United Nations. The U.S. owed the UN more than $3 billion. This included money for the 2025 budget and older payments. President Trump's government did not pay these dues. This was not an accident. It was a planned way to put pressure on global groups. The Trump administration used money as a tool. It stopped almost all foreign aid payments. It also closed down USAI, which is an important agency for giving help. The government even stopped $5 billion that Congress had already approved. This was the first time in 50 years that such a large amount of approved money was canceled this way. This financial pressure had a clear goal. President Trump wanted to make international organizations follow U.S. rules. He used economic power instead of talking with leaders in the usual way. This way of working caused big problems for people around the world. The cuts in aid had a very bad effect on humanitarian help. For example, in northern Nigeria, children who were not getting enough food started to die. This happened because food deliveries for them stopped. Many big aid groups warned that there would be shortages of help in many conflict areas. This meant people would not get the food, medicine, and support they needed. The United Nations itself faced very deep budget cuts. For the year 2026, its budget was cut by 15%. There were also plans to reduce staff by 19%. This cutting of money put the UN in a difficult spot. It made it hard for the organization to do its work. With the U.S. not paying its share and even more cuts planned, the UN faced a risk. The organization could struggle greatly or even break down. This was happening when the world needed countries to work together the most. The financial actions of the Trump administration created a serious challenge for global cooperation and the future of international aid. 8. What happens next? The Assembly Hall became very quiet after President Donald Trump finished speaking. There was an uncomfortable silence, not claps or cheers. Some leaders even left the room before the end of his long speech. This was a clear sign of the deep tension in the air. Unlike past times, no one laughed at his strong words. They just listened, often with serious faces. Even the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres showed great calm despite the difficult atmosphere. Another leader, General Assembly President Annalena Baerbock, gently said that it is not the time to walk away from the United Nations. Leaders from many countries, especially those in Europe, found themselves in a difficult spot. President Trump had spoken strongly against their policies, like how they manage immigration and climate change. He even said their countries were going to hell. But these same countries still needed the United States' help for big global issues, such as the conflict in Ukraine and other security problems. They had to decide how to react and how to work with the U.S. even after hearing such direct criticism. They needed to make complex choices for their own countries. The speech was not just a diplomatic moment. It was seen as a very important turning point for how countries deal with each other. President Trump's words showed his America First idea, which means focusing only on what is best for his own country. He questioned if global groups like the United Nations were truly useful anymore, saying it had tremendous potential but was not living up to it. He suggested that countries should solve problems on their own or through direct talks, not always through big international organizations. This approach creates a big challenge for global cooperation. The United Nations itself now faces problems, with the United States owing billions in dues. This financial pressure could lead to big budget cuts or even make the organization weaker. President Trump's way of thinking, called nationalism, stands against the idea of globalism, where all countries work together for common goals. This moment underlined a basic choice. Will countries work more as single nations or as part of a larger world community? How the world responds to this question will affect peace and global problem solving for many years to come. Experts believe this was a watershed moment, a defining time for international relations. What do you think will be the biggest change in how countries work together after this historic speech?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.